people pleasing is not really about pleasing people at all. It's about managing the moment. It's about keeping someone from being disappointed or irritated or hurt or angry or withdrawn. I'm Dr. Lori Stevick Rust. 40 years of sitting with people through their hardest moments has taught me one thing. Our power lives in our courage to be real. This is where we stop pretending and we find our way back to ourselves. I'm glad you're here. Now pull up a chair. This is Becoming Real. Do you know a people pleaser? Are you one? When you picture a people pleaser, or when you describe yourself as one, what comes to mind? Go ahead, take a minute, and picture that person in your life. Or just go ahead and raise your hand and admit it's you. Often when somebody comes into my office feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, resentful, or unable to hold a boundary, and we start to peel back the layers, we often find a pattern of people pleasing underneath all of that. I mean, let's be honest. People pleasing sounds generous. It sounds like you're trying to make life easier for everyone around you. And sometimes, of course, we do those thoughtful things because we love people. We make room, we adjust, we compromise. That's part of being in a real relationship. But that's not what I'm talking about today. A lot of the time, people pleasing is not really about pleasing people at all. It's about managing the moment. It's about keeping someone from being disappointed or irritated or hurt or angry or withdrawn. It's about trying to keep the room calm and conflict-free. Let's just keep the conversation smooth, keep the other person okay. And the problem is that kind of peace does not usually last. It becomes what I have learned to call over the years conflict debt. We pay for it. We pay for it later in resentment, in exhaustion, in distance, in that strange feeling of not quite recognizing ourselves anymore because we've spent so much time adjusting to what everyone else needs from us. And the research actually supports this. When psychologists study patterns like self-silencing or how we suppress our emotions, we're often looking at this very thing. What happens when we keep swallowing our own thoughts and our needs and our feelings in order to avoid tension or simply to preserve connection? And of course, in the short run, it may calm things down. But in the long run, it can cost us honesty, closeness, emotional energy, and oftentimes even our health. So today I want to talk about people pleasing, but in that real sense. To be clear, again, I'm not talking about being kind, sweet, thoughtful, or accommodating to express our love and compassion. That's wonderful. I'm talking about a version of behavior where you say yes before you even know whether you mean it. The version where you soften your opinion so no one feels uncomfortable around you. Where you apologize when you really haven't done anything wrong. Where you explain and explain and explain a boundary until it barely sounds like a boundary anymore at all. I see you laughing out there because this is a big one, particularly for women. We over-explain that boundary and it then becomes something soft and non-boundary-like. I'm talking about those times when you agree in the moment and then you resent it later. And even when you take on that responsibility of the mood in the room, this one is really important. Believing and then acting like we can manage everybody else's mood, everybody else's behavior, and the overall tension in the room. And when you end up feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, and burned out, and you wonder, where did this come from? I wonder why I'm so tired. I wonder why I chronically feel overwhelmed. Because many people pleasers are not sitting around thinking, how can I betray myself today? That's not what is happening. What is happening is more automatic than that. We're scanning the room. Is that person upset? Did I say too much? Did I sound stupid? Did I disappoint them? Are they trying to avoid me? Should I go over there and try to fix it? Should I take it back? Should I just have said yes? I probably could still do that. Yep, I'm going to go over there and just say, yes, you know what? I think I can do that. I wish I could see your faces because I know many of you are probably really nodding out there because people pleasing is a big issue. The research literature uses a term called self silencing, and I think it fits here. It refers to the way people may judge themselves through other people's eyes, put other people's needs ahead of our own, hide feelings to avoid conflict, and live with a split between the self they show to everybody else and the self that we actually feel on the inside. And this is why we need to stop imagining or thinking that people pleasers are just really, those kind people. We want to be kind people. We want to be liked. But there is a big difference. Now, let me be very clear. I really do believe this world needs more kind, compassionate, giving people who are standing up for themselves and for others, who are giving in a non-selfish way. But let's not mistake people pleasing with those traits. Now, before we go any further, let me pause and say, people pleasing as a style or behavior is learned, not a label for who we are at the core. At some point, it's likely that learning the behavior was a way to manage anxiety, avoid the fear of being rejected, or keep love from feeling like it's disappearing. Sometimes it's our nervous system that learned a long, long time ago that honesty was a little risky and smoothness was safer. Then, of course, it's likely that the behavior got reinforced. Maybe it worked in a family where someone's anger filled the whole house. Maybe it worked in a relationship where love felt conditional. Or perhaps it was reinforced in your workplace where being easy was rewarded and being direct was punished. I see many of you young women out there nodding your heads. I know you are. I know you're listening to this and saying, yeah, that's me, but what am I supposed to do about it? Ask yourself, in your workplace, do you tend to be the one who's seen as reliable, dependable, and easy to get along with because you say yes to every request without setting up a boundary? Now, again, to be clear, being a team player is not the same as people pleasing. Pitching in, going the extra mile, supporting colleagues, those could be generous and even a healthy thing. But if you're always the one saying yes, always the one absorbing the extra work, always the one afraid to ask for the raise or name what you need because you do not want to rock the boat, that's different. That's not teamwork anymore. That's just you straight up abandoning yourself. Are you starting to see even the phrase people pleasing, the pleasing of others, doesn't really reflect what this pattern or behavior is actually about? Do you see others setting personal boundaries that seem to be respected, but your time and the extra asks are reserved only for you? Because, well, you never say no. So it's easy to take advantage of you, not give you the raise, because you didn't want to rock the boat by even asking for it, instead sitting around hoping that they would simply notice your great job, well done, and then reward you. People-pleasing behavior can quietly teach us that our energy, our time, and our limits are negotiable. And over time, that can leave us feeling disrespected and devalued. Maybe it worked in childhood when being good, agreeable, helpful, and low maintenance got you attention or kept you safer. So we have to be careful here. For some people, people-pleasing is about wanting approval. But for other people, it was about survival. Those are not the same things, not the same origin. And we should not talk about them as if they are, because people-pleasing does work temporarily. That is what makes it so hard to give it up. The person is not upset. The room stays calm. The tension is gone. The risk of avoiding awkward pauses, to avoid the guilt, to avoid potential trauma. You avoid being seen as selfish, difficult, cold, ungrateful, demanding, or just straight up too much. And the brain pays attention to that. We know in psychology that avoidance gets reinforced when it removes something uncomfortable. If I do something and the discomfort drops, my brain says, ooh, yeah, do that again. So if I say yes and the tension goes down, my brain learns yes. If I apologize and the other person softens, my brain learns apologize. If I hide what I really think and the room stays calm, my brain learns hide. And over time, the lesson becomes very simple. When I abandon myself, the stress goes down, at least right now in this temporary moment. And right now, relief is one of the fastest teachers that we have. That's why people pleasing can become so automatic. It's not just a habit, it's a nervous system pattern. It's the body reaching for the thing that has worked before, over and over and over. But the problem is that the bill does come due later because you don't really avoid the conflict. You simply move it, you relocate it, maybe somewhere else in your body. And then it shows up as emotional exhaustion, resentment. Maybe it even turns into a passive aggressive behavior to try and express your needs without directly expressing them. It can also get moved into relationships where people may experience you as easy to be around, but they don't actually know what you think, need, want, or feel. They only know what you're showing them, the pretend fake you. And this is where the research is pretty blunt. When people regularly suppress emotions or conceal important parts of themselves, it can affect relationship satisfaction, your social functioning, authenticity, of course, and overall your psychological well-being. The body carries it, especially when the pattern is chronic. Because the body doesn't just say, oh, good, we avoided a difficult conversation. The body often says, we are still holding all that. The fatigue, the irritability, the sleep interruptions, the tightness in our chest, and that low-grade sense of resentment. Then there's the mental replaying, which is another big one. Mentally, we keep replaying things over and over. Then tell me how you sleep. If we're playing things over and over when we're trying to sleep, it interrupts it. And then poor sleep feeds the cycle of overwhelm and fatigue and exhaustion, and you see where this is going. The sense that you are overextended, but somehow still feel guilty for wanting less. That is why I call it conflict debt. The debt still exists. It's just no longer on the surface where everybody can see it. And that's the hard truth to hear and integrate. People pleasing can make our relationships feel really smooth while making them less honest. That matters because many of us were taught to confuse harmony with health. But they're not the same thing. A relationship can feel very calm because one person is doing all the emotional editing. Look at your relationships. Are you the one that's doing that? Or do you have a friend who's the one doing that, or a spouse or a partner? A family can look very close because one person never says the thing that might disrupt the family system. A workplace can look very collaborative because one person is chronically over-accommodating. And even a friendship can look easy because one person is always adjusting, always available, always pleasing, always understanding, always fine. But stability is not the same as mutuality. And being easy to be around is not the same as being real. That's such an important distinction if you want real relationships. Because a lot of people pleasers are deeply loved for the version of themselves that never creates inconvenience. Whew. But love that depends on your disappearance is not the same as intimacy. So what's the difference between kindness and people pleasing? I think it's this. Kindness says, I care about you and I can still be honest. People pleasing says, I care about you, so I'll hide what I really feel, over-accommodate what you need, and stay quiet about anything that might create tension. Kindness allows both people to honestly show up. People pleasing keeps one person comfortable by making the other person smaller, quieter, softer, or invisible. And that's not the same thing. Kindness can say, I love you, and I cannot do that. Kindness can say, I understand this matters to you, and this does not work for me. Kindness can say, I care about our relationship, so I want to be honest before I get resentful. People-pleasing often says, it's fine, when it's not fine. And the resentment starts writing the truth later. This is where assertiveness matters. Of course, we all know that assertiveness is not aggression. That's not what I'm talking about. And sometimes people think they're being assertive, but they're really being passive aggressive or overtly aggressive, and then label it as, I'm standing up for myself. I'm just setting a boundary. But when it is simply a way to let your resentment and anger loose, that's not being assertive and standing up for yourself. Assertiveness is simply being clear, direct, and respectful. And it doesn't promise that the other person will love your answer. Get it? They may not love your answer. That's the part that we have to accept. Assertiveness does not guarantee their approval, their affection, their love, their agreement. It simply refuses to make approval the price of honesty. And for people pleasers, that can feel terrifying at first because the moment you stop managing every reaction, you may feel like you're doing something wrong. You may feel guilty, selfish, and exposed in a really icky, vulnerable way. You're probably going to feel the urge to send a second text message, add another explanation, soften that no. Make sure that they're not mad. Make sure that they understand. Make sure that no one thinks badly of you. That's the old pattern trying to come back because old patterns are familiar, which makes them feel safe. And again, I want to be clear. If people pleasing has been a survival strategy for you, especially in a family system, a marriage, a workplace, or a trauma history where conflict really did come with punishment, then the goal is not to judge yourself for learning that. The goal is to recognize that a strategy that once protected you may now be costing you way too much. It may have helped you get through a certain part of your life and may have helped you stay attached and safe. But now it may be leaving you exhausted, resentful, overcommitted, and disconnected from your own voice. That's the work. Not the shame of the old strategy, but to notice when it no longer serves your life. So what do we practice instead? And I don't want to just say set boundaries because that has almost become so generic and overused that I don't even know if it's really helpful. The concept helps, but saying I'm just going to set a boundary and then not know what you're really doing with that, I don't think is particularly helpful. I think we need something more like a replacement. Actual sentences, actual pauses, actual ways to interrupt that automatic yes. Okay, so here are 5 places that I think is a nice beginning. The first practice is really simple. Pause before you say yes. That's it. Don't answer while your anxiety is high. Try something like, I need to check and get back to you. I know that sounds really novel, but how many times do we not do that? We feel like when we're on the spot, we have to give an answer. That one sentence can change the whole pattern because people pleasing often happens so quickly in that moment. The yes comes out before the truth has even time to reach our mind. So give yourself time. You don't have to know immediately. You don't have to respond in the moment. You don't have to make your nervous system's first reaction your final answer, like, oh my gosh, I got to say yes. I better hurry up and say yes. I feel like I'm on the spot. The second practice is to tell the truth earlier when it's still small. This matters in almost all situations and all relationships because many people wait until they're furious before they're honest. They say yes 10 times and then explode on the 11th. Or they hold it in for months and then the whole relationship feels unsafe. But honesty is easier when it's still small. So try something maybe like, I want to be honest before I get resentful. I say this a lot in couples therapy. Just start the sentence with a very clear expectation. I love you and I'm committed and I want to be honest because if I don't and I hold this in, I am going to become resentful. It's just such a very clean sentence. It's a level setter for the conversation. It's not blaming. It's not attacking. It's simply saying, I care enough about this relationship to tell the truth before I turn it into a quiet grudge. And we all know how ugly quiet grudges are. There's nothing pleasing about a quiet grudge. The third practice is to let disappointment exist. Ladies, I'm looking squarely at you. Let disappointment exist. This may be one of the hardest ones. Someone being disappointed does not automatically mean you did something wrong. The sentence may sound really obvious, but for people pleasers, it can feel almost impossible to believe because disappointment can feel like danger. It can feel like rejection or abandonment. It can feel like proof that you failed. But sometimes disappointment is just disappointment. Someone wanted something from you and you couldn't give it to them. Someone hoped you would say yes and you said no. Someone preferred a different answer and you gave the honest one. That doesn't mean you were selfish or cruel, and you don't have to repair something that is not actually broken. The fourth practice is clean language. What do I mean by that? Well, people pleasing often comes with a lot of extra language because the real goal is not communication. The real goal is approval. Let me say that again, because the real goal is not communication, it's approval. So we say no, but then we wrap it in 10 layers of apology. We explain the calendar. We explain the whole backstory. We explain how bad we feel. We explain why we're still a good person. Really, I am. We explain until the boundary becomes an opening for negotiations. But clean language sounds more like this. I can't do that. That doesn't work for me. I wish I could, but I can't. I'm not available for that. I need to pass this time. I can't take that on. That's it. That's enough. And yes, you can be warm, you can be kind, you can be gracious, you can be all of those wonderful qualities. But a boundary does not have to become more valid because it's wrapped in a 5-minute apology or a 30-minute explanation. I see your heads nodding. This is really the hardest part. Over-explaining is not clarity. It's simply a boundary trying to get approval. I'm going to set my boundary, but I want you to still like me. I want you to still think well of me. I don't want you to be upset. I don't want to know that the next time it's going to be awkward between us. That's why it's difficult, but important. The fifth practice is noticing your body. Because as we've talked about before, and we recognize and know, and certainly for me as a health psychologist, I know that our mind and our body are one. The body often knows before our mouth can even say the words, before our mind has even caught up, before our brain can even fully articulate. We feel it. So if you say yes and immediately feel tight in your chest, heavy, a little irritated, resentful, trapped, pay attention to that. That doesn't mean every uncomfortable yes is wrong. We all do things we do not feel like doing. I get it. That's part of love. It's part of work. It's part of parenting. It's certainly part of caregiving and friendships. And honestly, even that crummy thing of adulting. But there's a difference between choosing a sacrifice freely and agreeing because you're afraid of the reaction. We can choose to say, this is not comfortable. This is not what I really want to do, but I'm sacrificing for somebody that I love, or because my friend would do the same thing for me. That's different than agreeing because you're afraid of the reaction from the other person. Here's the difference. Sometimes we freely choose to sacrifice our time, our energy, and our comfort for someone we love. Freely choosing to be giving and loving and sacrificing some part of our wants and needs is just part of being in a real relationship. And that's normal and that's healthy. But that's very different than saying yes because you're afraid of the guilt, afraid of the silence, afraid of what might happen to the relationship if you tell the truth. One is generosity and the other is fear. There's a difference, of course, as we know, between generosity and abandoning ourselves. There's a difference between helping someone and disappearing into what they need. And trust me, your body will often give you clues. Not always perfect answers, but clues. And if you're listening right now and you know this pattern, you probably know that feeling. The immediate relief after saying yes, and then the slow, steady burn of resentment later. The quick comfort of avoiding the conflict, And then the emotional hangover that follows, the part of you that says, oh my gosh, why did I agree to that? Why didn't I just tell them how I really feel? That's the conflict debt. That's the receipt for the yes you didn't mean. And listen, I'm not suggesting that every relationship can handle your honesty. Some relationships just can't. Some people benefit from your silence. Some systems depend on you staying agreeable all the time. That's real. And in those cases, boundaries may need extra support, maybe planning, maybe safety, maybe therapy, maybe legal guidance, maybe workplace protection, or a bigger conversation than a podcast episode can offer. And for many everyday situations, the practice begins with smaller honesty. Just one moment where you stop betraying yourself for a temporary calm. One pause before yes, one clean sentence, one honest answer, one boundary that does not come with a whole dissertation, and one moment where you let someone be mildly disappointed and you don't rush in to rescue them. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the people in your life is to stop managing every reaction around you. Separate what is theirs to own and what is yours. That's how real trust gets built. Not through constant accommodations and pretending everything is fine. Those relationships are rarely satisfying and, in my experience, rarely last. Trust is built when people can know the truth and stay in relationship with it. And that means they need access to the real you. Not just the agreeable you, the edited superficial you, the version that makes life easier for everyone else, but the real you, the one who has limits and preferences and needs, the one who sometimes says, I just can't, that doesn't work for me. I love you, and the answer is no. So maybe this week the practice is not some big confrontation. Maybe it's one clean sentence. Let me get back to you before you automatically agree. Maybe it's telling the truth while it's still small and letting disappointment exist without treating it like some emergency in your relationship or some crisis. Maybe it's simply just noticing that over-explaining is often your anxiety asking for permission. A word or a sentence can be a complete explanation. It really, really can. And I think that remembering that a yes can cost you your honesty, which is not kindness. You're not keeping the peace if it costs you your reality. You're simply postponing the truth. And eventually, the truth finds a way to speak. It may show up as resentment, as exhaustion, or distance you physically and emotionally from the people that you love and the relationships in your life. Sometimes it shows up in the body with physical symptoms of a nervous system that is in overdrive. That's why I hear people saying, I'm so exhausted, I'm so burned out, I'm so overextended. You may find that when you keep trying to please others at the risk of your own self, your body and mind will keep tugging at you through that quiet inner voice that says, I cannot keep doing this. So listen to that voice earlier. Don't wait for it to turn into exhaustion and then resentment. Resentment is like a cancer in a relationship. It spreads. It rarely stays quiet. It leaks out in our tone, in our distance, in our irritation, in our withdrawal, and all the things that we say are fine when they're absolutely not fine. Now remember, this is a practice that takes time. It's the unraveling of perhaps a lifetime of a behavioral pattern that felt maybe protective and safe in many ways. It'll take time to change. And I think this is where people get discouraged because they want the change to feel natural right away. And of course, it won't. At first, honesty may feel awkward. Let's be honest, a clean no may feel inadequate and unfinished, especially if you're not used to saying it. And letting someone be disappointed may feel almost unbearable. But I promise you, it's the ticket to a healthy relationship. Remember, it takes time for your nervous system to learn a new way to stay connected with others while staying true to yourself. But as I say to everyone who comes into my office, usually Change starts small and it requires consistency. You do not undo a lifetime pattern in one brave sentence. But every time you pause before the automatic yes, every time you tell the truth a little sooner, every time you let someone have their own disappointment without rushing to fix it, you're teaching your nervous system something new. You're teaching it that honesty is not the same as danger, that a boundary is not the same as rejection, that being real is not about being unkind. And maybe that's the deeper point here. The best way to please the people who truly love you is not to keep becoming whatever makes them comfortable. Again, the best way to please the people who truly love you is not to keep becoming whatever makes them comfortable. It's to let them know the real you, the one who has limits, needs, and the one with a voice. Because real kindness does not require your disappearance. Real connection does not ask you to abandon yourself in order to belong. And the relationships worth keeping are the ones that make room for your truth, not just your yes. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Before you go, if this episode touched something real in you, please consider sharing it with someone who may need that too. If you'd like to stay connected beyond the podcast, sign up for my email list at drloristevick.com. That's where I share more reflections, resources, and an invitation to join the real conversation, which is my free live monthly gathering for women who want deeper conversations beyond the podcast. Until next time, be brave enough to be real.